One of my favorite C.S. Lewis quotes, you may have heard me say before, is that God is not the sort of thing that you can be moderately interested in. Right? God and the existence of God and how we respond to God is not the sort of thing that you can be kind of interested in. Because if God exists, if there is indeed a God, and if it is the Christian one that rose from the grave, then nothing in your life can ever be the same. And in fact, every fact of your life must be oriented around the existence of that God, that we must constantly ask what that God wants of us and respond in the correct ways to Him. Our lives should be oriented around the God that created us, if there is a God that created us. But of course, if there is no God, then there's no reason to be interested in God at all. We are all simply here wasting our time because religion is a very poor and lame hobby. There is simply no reason to be moderately interested in God. Either He is everything or He is nothing. The truth is that your life, if there is no God, is ultimately without meaning, to start off with a little Easter morning joy. If your life and the lives of everyone around you are just doomed to end in cold death, then what you do while you're here really is of no real value, no real meaning, really in the end doesn't matter. If the story of the universe is that in the beginning there was nothing, and then at the end, there will again be the same amount of nothing, then what does it matter what you do in the in-between part? What does it matter how you live your life and this little blip on the radar that your existence is? It doesn't matter. If there is no God, none of it matters. None of it really makes a difference. Your life is inconsequential. This is one of the main messages of the book of Ecclesiastes, which we're going to start studying soon. That the day comes and the night comes, that the rivers start and the rivers keep going, and then water goes back to where they began, that babies are born, that elderly people die, and the world keeps spinning, and nothing you really do makes a bit of difference about it. Vanities of vanities, meaningless, worthlessness. Who cares what you do with your life if ultimately it all indeed comes to nothing? So the contribution of the scientist to advancement of human knowledge, the research of the doctor to alleviate pain and suffering, the efforts of the diplomat to secure peace for humanity, the sacrifices of good people everywhere, in the end, come to nothing and matter not at all if there is no God. Your conscience is meaningless, your reason is untrustworthy, beauty is illusory, and love is empty. If there is no God, then there is ultimately no hope for deliverance from any of the realities that come as a result of our finite human existence. No hope in a world filled with unredeemed suffering. No hope for deliverance from evil. No hope of deliverance from age or disease. No hope of seeing those who have gone on before us. If there is no God, then even us as humans are not special. All we are is the lucky collocation of atoms who breathe for a bit and then quit breathing. Albert Camus, who's a famous atheist philosopher, pondering on these things, says, if God is dead, meaning if God does not exist, he says the only serious question left for philosophers to examine is the question of suicide. Into this world, this increasingly nihilistic world that believes all the things that I just said, but just does everything they can not to think about it. Into this world, we preach a resurrected Savior. Into this world, we preach God becoming flesh, rising from the dead, and in the moment that His blood began pumping again, changing everything. Into this world, into this worldview, this hopelessness, we preach the hope. We preach the light in the darkness. That's what we are here today for, is that hope amidst the hopelessness, that light amidst the darkness, that meaning, that purpose, that joy amidst the emptiness. It all comes down to this. It all comes down to the moment that we gather today to think about. Amen. And we gather today to celebrate. No event in history reaches the importance of the resurrection. That's right. If Christ didn't rise, none of it matters. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, if you don't want to believe in Christianity, the simple thing to do is to prove that He didn't rise from the dead. That this is the fulcrum point. This is everything. That if He rose, It's all true, whether you like all the things that he said or not. And if he didn't rise, none of it's true. Everything in humanity's existence comes down to this moment, to whether or not Christ rose. And of course, he did. John chapter 20. We're going to read a passage together, John's version of the story of the resurrection, verses 1 through 17. We're going to read from John's gospel. Let's read the word of the Lord together. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came up to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." So Peter went out with the other disciple, probably John, and they were going toward the tomb. Both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went straight into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes, but Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. And as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and that he had said these things to her. This event that we think on, that the world thinks on, at least in some measure today on this day of Easter, answers three of life's biggest questions. One of the great joys as a parent is when your child starts asking the big questions, right? Why am I here? How did I get here? All of these questions that are good for them to think about. This event answers three of the very biggest ones. That's what we're going to talk about. Firstly is this: the resurrection answers who indeed he was, who Christ was. On the back of your bulletins, by the way, there's an outline of the sermon and all the verses I'll be using. So if you don't want to jot down as I'm going, they'll be there for you. The resurrection answers who he was. This is indeed the question, right? It's the question that Jesus asked Peter when he says, "Who do you say that I am?" It's the question that everything in Peter's life had hung on to up to that moment. And it's the question that all of us, every thinking person that exists in the 21st century and has ever existed, must answer. What will you do with Jesus? Neutral you cannot be. Who was Jesus? The resurrection offers you an answer. Now, our culture, interestingly, at the moment, gives basically two answers to the question. The first one is, some will still say that he was a myth, that he didn't exist. You'll get laughed out of scholarship in the world if you try to say that anymore. That was an idea about 130 years ago. It was called the Jesus mysticism movement that said he never existed. Nobody that has acclaimed the position of scholar, nobody thinks that anymore. You'll see it on Facebook around December 25th and maybe around Easter with people that don't know what they're talking about. But no one claims anymore on the scholar level that he didn't exist. The other option that the culture gives is that, well, okay, he existed, he was a good teacher, and we should listen to him, had some good moral things to say. But the truth is that that's not an option either, because he was a guy who claimed to be divine, right? He was a man who claimed to be God and who claimed that he was going to rise from the dead. So if he wasn't God and yet claimed to be, he was at best insane. And if he wasn't God and didn't rise from the dead but said he was going to, he was a liar. And so this is not the kind of man that's a good moral teacher we should listen to. So the options of who Jesus is, that is a question that all of us must answer, cannot be that he was a myth, cannot be that he was just a good teacher, good moral figure. Neither one of those work. And so you must come to an answer about what you're going to do with him if you're going to be a thinking person. Again, neutral you cannot be. Verses 6 and 7, which we read, It says Peter went into the tomb, and he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Now, this is interesting. That word saw, he saw the linen cloths lying there, is not the normal Greek word for just physically seeing something with your eyes. The word there is actually the Greek word theoreo, where we get our word theorize, right? It really means to look for an explanation, to go in trying to understand what he is seeing. So Peter walks in and begins theorizing about why the tomb is empty, trying to explain what he is seeing. One of the things I love about Christianity is that it's not a blind faith religion, as much of the world thinks that it is, right? That you just believe it. I don't know why you should, but just believe it. God has never been that sort of God. From the very beginning, God is the sort of God that says, here's the reasons you should believe the things that I'm telling you. It was that way throughout the Old Testament. It's that way throughout the New Testament. It's still that way today. God says, here's some reasons you should believe. Far too much of the world thinks that the way it works is, well, thinking people, scientific people, they think and reason. Christians, they just believe. Fallacious, awful, terrible, not at all true. From the very beginning, God has said, reason about these things. Think on these things. Here's the evidence. Here's some reasons you should believe why I am telling you what I'm telling you is true. Not a blind faith religion, not a just hope that it's true sort of religion. Think, ask questions, ask the tough ones, ask the difficult ones, because we have the truth. We want to figure the answers to those questions out together. The idea the world has of Peter, right, in this scenario, the idea the world has of Christians is like if Peter walked into this tomb and he goes, he's risen, right? That immediately his mind goes to resurrection, but that's not what happens. Peter walks in and goes, I wonder what happened. We know that as well from Mary, right, in this story. And later on in chapter 20, he actually says it twice in verse 2 and 13. What does Mary say? When the gardener, who thinks is the gardener, asks her what she's doing, she walks into the empty tomb. They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him. That's Mary, right? One of the ones who followed Jesus the whole time. Mary Magdalene, who had been with him from the beginning, who heard him say the things he said. When she sees the empty tomb, does she go, resurrection? No. Like me and you would have done, she says, someone took the body, right? That's the reasonable explanation. Right? The idea people have of Christians and Christianity is that it's just a bunch of gullible people who just believe whatever they want to believe and base their whole lives around it. No, Peter wasn't like that. Mary wasn't like that. Nobody was like that. They were just like us, skeptical, assuming that someone took the body. That was the explanation that made sense to Mary. She didn't think, well, maybe he rose, but maybe he rose. Her immediate explanation was, someone took the body and I need to go find it. I need to bring it back to the tomb. Right? There's this idea that those first century people, they just didn't think the way we think. They just accepted things like miracles and like resurrections. No. They were skeptical like you and I were. And so, God makes sure that they can indeed believe. Same thing we have with the apostles, actually, in Luke's version, in chapter 24. Mary comes back to them the first time and says, the tomb is empty. Jesus has risen, I guess, after this has occurred. And it says, returning from the tomb, they, Mary and the other women, told these things to the 11. But the 11, right, the apostles who would take the gospel to the world, the ones who were with him on that night in the upper room, the ones who watched him die, the ones who heard him preach all the sermons, they said, nah. It seemed to them an idle tale. Right? The world's idea of Christians, that they're just gullible people who believe things, that's never been the case. It's always been here's the reasons you should believe. Come in and theorize. Come into the tomb and think about what happened. So Peter doesn't just blindly dive into the conclusion of resurrection. He, like us, thinks that likely something else has happened. So he starts looking for answers, starts theorizing. The most obvious conclusion, the one that Mary came to, the one that Peter likely thought was true, was that someone took the body. Grave robbing was fairly common in the first century because they would bury people with very expensive spices and other things, and people would go into the graves and take them. And so Peter is probably thinking at first, maybe that's what happened. But then he walks in and he wonders, well, if grave robbers came, why would they take the body naked, which was worthless, and leave the linen cloths with all the pounds of spices in them laying there? Why would they take the linen cloths that were on his face and fold them and put them back, and not just toss them about as grave robbers would. And on the other hand, if it was the disciples that came and took him, why would they dishonor Christ by taking him away without clothes? So Peter's theorizing, thinking on these things. What are the things that I'm seeing? What do they mean? What is going on here? The same thing that God intends for us to do. In Acts chapter 17, you can turn there if you want, but it'll be on the screen. Acts chapter 17, verse 31. Says, he will judge the world, that's God, will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. Now, I want you to listen to the reasoning here, okay, to the logic that's being used. And of this, he says, okay, of the fact that this man who God is raising up will be the judge, of this, of the resurrection, of the last day, of the fact that there will be a judgment day. Okay, listen to the reason. Use your brains. Of this, he has given assurance to all by raising Jesus from the dead. Okay, so let me work that out a little bit with you. Of the fact that there will be a judgment day, of the fact that there will be a heaven and a hell, of the fact that there will be that day, God gives assurance of that to you by raising Jesus from the dead. Right? So God thinks, obviously, that he can assure you of that reality by the resurrection, that you can look at the resurrection and by the evidence of the resurrection, believe that he rose and therefore believe that we all will rise. That the resurrection is the proof to you to give you assurance of resurrection. Right? So it isn't that at this pivotal moment in human history, in this pivotal event that you either believe happened or don't believe happened. It isn't that God says, well, you just kind of have to guess. Right? Just take a guess. Maybe he rose, maybe he didn't. I hope you picked the right one. That's not the position that God puts you in. He doesn't say just guess. Just guessing wouldn't work with the reasoning here. God says, here's the proof I'm going to give you that one day you will rise. And the proof is the resurrection. This is what he uses to assure us. And so this is how God did it. Okay, this is what he does. God raises Jesus from the dead, and then saw to it that there were eyewitnesses that could testify about that raising, that could go into the world and say, here's what I saw with my very own 2 eyes. And then Jesus hung around for 40 days so that many eyewitnesses would be able to testify as if they were in court about what had occurred, about what they had actually seen. In Acts chapter 10, verse 40 and 41, it says, God raised Jesus on the 3rd day and made him to appear, not to all people, but to us who had been chosen by God as witnesses. People say, well, why didn't Christ just appear to everybody? Why didn't he just appear to everybody? That's never been the way that he wanted to do it. From the very beginning, the plan was always the same. He didn't appear to everybody then. He doesn't appear to everybody today. He appeared to a set group of people that he had assigned from the foundation of the world. He appeared to them in bodily form, and then they would then leave and become the eyewitnesses to his resurrection, and everyone else, including me and you, would believe based on their word. It's one of the reasons, by the way, that we know there's not any more apostles, is because Acts chapter 1, one of the primary features that you had to have to be an apostle was that you were an actual physical eyewitness of what Jesus did, so that you could then go and say, here's what I saw with my very own eyes. John, earlier in his gospel, in the middle of the story about the crucifixion, takes a little parentheses and says, he who saw it, meaning himself, has borne witness. His testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, that you may also believe. The apostles see Christ risen from the grave and then go into the world and testify about what they have seen so that you and I and the rest of the world can believe. The question is, what weight do you give to their testimony? God intends for you to think about these things. We aren't going to go over all the evidence for the resurrection, and there is plenty of it, but I think you should do that. If you're a Christian, it will strengthen your faith greatly. And it will allow you to talk to basically anybody, believer or not, about Christ, because this is the chief issue. If Christ rose, then you can dislike what he said about other things, but it really doesn't matter all that much. If he rose, he is indeed who he claimed to be. And if he didn't, then none of it matters. If you're not a Christian, then what in the world are you waiting on? Every morning, the sun rises outside of my window, and it shines on my bed, and it works its way to my face. And if I don't want to see the sun that day, I can just close my eyes and pull the covers over my head and pretend that it hasn't risen. But every day, the cosmos itself testifies to me about the reality of the risen Son. And the same thing is true of you today. Listen, the same thing is true of you today. The only way you can ignore the reality of the risen Savior. Listen, the only way you can ignore the reality of the risen Christ is if you pull the covers over your head. Is if you close your eyes and pretend that it didn't happen. Because if it happened, nothing can ever be the same. Everything will change from now and forevermore. After 2,000 years, there are no good explanations about what happened to that body. 2,000 years ago, in Jerusalem, over the sea, there was an empty tomb that once had a body in it and then didn't have a body in it. In the last 2,000 years, there have been no good explanations about what happened to that body. There have been no good explanations offered about how the apostles, these fishermen who ran away from the cross, all of a sudden 3 days later are willing to go to their torturous deaths for preaching the resurrection. There's been no explanation offered to why all these Christians are willing to face persecution and suffering and death just a few days later after the Messiah died. There's been no explanation offered about why after the leader of Christianity, which by the way was less people than are gathered here today in these walls, the leader of those people dies on the cross and his little religion doesn't die on the cross with him. It did actually for a couple of days, right? And then all of a sudden, a few days later, it becomes quite literally the greatest movement in the history of the world when every power in the world at the time, Rome, Jerusalem, and everything was trying to squash it. And yet somehow, this little movement of 100 or so people when he died on the cross becomes the greatest thing that's ever existed. There's been no explanation for how in the world that happened. There have been little Messiah-like figures throughout history, but when they died, their religions died. And yet still this one is continuing, perhaps because theirs never actually died, or at least he didn't remain dead. What is your explanation for what happened? Who are your witnesses? What will you believe? Everything comes down to this. So it answers who he was. It answers that he was indeed God in the flesh, the one that he claimed to be. Okay. More quickly. Secondly, it answers who you are. It answers who you are. Verses 16 and 17, Jesus says, "Go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and to your God." The resurrection means that you are now a member of the family of God, if you're a Christian. If you are bowed to Christ, you are indeed a member of the family of God. We are maybe the most self-identity obsessed culture in history. Very obsessed with the way the world is looking at us, the way the world is viewing us, and how exactly we see that identity. Probably in large part because of how extremely individualistic our culture has become. Right? Increasingly, we have moved away from identifying ourselves as we and identifying ourselves more as I and focusing on who I am as opposed to who I am with others. If you'd ask Christians throughout history who they were, they would have said, I am a child of God and I am part of the family of God. That is the identity of us. I'm a child of God and I am part of the family of God. Throughout the Gospel of John, very interestingly, Jesus talks about God and refers to him as my Father. I'm going to my Father sent me. All of these times, they're all in your outline if you want them later. All these times, Jesus says, my Father. That's the way he refers to his Father. My Father, my Father, my Father, my Father. And then phenomenally, the moment after he rises from the grave, for the first time, he says these words, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. He said, the resurrection itself is the thing that brought you into the family of God. It is the resurrection itself that is the ground for us calling each other brothers and sisters. Right? We say that, those weird church people calling each other brothers and sisters. The reason we do that is because Christ rose from the grave. It is grounded in him coming out of that tomb and making us part of the family of God. I'm ascending, he says, to my Father and to your Father. And it's not just that when he rose from the grave, he made you part of the Godhead, or it's not just that he justified you. It's not just even that he washed away your sins. It's also that he connected you with these sinful people, right? And then he made you part of these sinful groups that we call churches, that we call Christians. That he has made us part of. The family of God is more than just the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's these people that are really difficult sometimes. It's these people that cause you hardships. It's these people that are sinful but redeemed, who are selfish, less than they were a year ago, but still selfish. It's these people that we call the church and that we call these brothers and sisters he has connected us to. And so that's why when we have this another prevailing worldview of I'm just going to do the Jesus thing by myself. I'm just going to focus on my individual relationship with God. The church is dirty and messy, and so I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm going to be spiritual, but I'm not going to go to church. I just want to say the Bible doesn't know what that means. Right? There's no category in the Bible for someone who follows the Lord on their own. That doesn't make sense in the Scriptures. You won't find anyone in the Bible, in the New Testament, wandering around just kind of following Jesus on their own. Everyone who comes to know Christ immediately becomes part of a body of believers, becomes part of a church, becomes living life with other Christians immediately. There's very little time where they go from non-converted to being involved with the body of believers because they are being brought into a family, right? So we find Christians throughout the Scriptures. Instead of just doing their own kind of individual relationship thing, we find Christians doing things like bearing each other's burdens and bearing with one another, which is a statement and a command which only is possible if people are difficult, right? Because you can't bear with people that are easy. We find Christians in the New Testament bearing with each other and holding each other accountable for sin and encouraging each other just to keep going, encouraging one another to keep doing good deeds and keep following the Lord and praying for one another and carrying one another and picking up each other when they fall and always being there for each other, almost as if they really thought they were family. And that's what happens here. When Christ rises from the grave, he says, "Dear Renee, welcome to my family," which includes the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, but just as much so includes the people that you're going to be living next to, the people in time that I have placed you nearby for you to love and to be loved by, to be encouraged by and to encouraged. Of course, it's messy. Of course, it's difficult from time to time. We are all of us in the church, battling our own sinfulness and our own selfishness. If it's not messy from time to time, it isn't real, or it certainly isn't close enough to you. The church is going to be difficult from time to time. It shouldn't surprise you. It should surprise you if it's not, because you're a mess, right? And so am I, because all of us are. This isn't some museum where we just come and show you how the perfect people look. This is a place where battered and bruised soldiers meet again every week to just stir one another on to keep going, right? With armor that is beaten and is chipped and is rugged and has lost some battles during the week. But they meet again together as brothers and sisters, as family, to stir one another on, to encourage one another, to remind each other of what Christ did for us and what that means for our day-to-day lives. This is what the church is. It's a family. And I don't know if you have one of those, but those are normally messy. Those are normally difficult. We're going to go eat with them this afternoon. It'll be great. You are a son or a daughter of the King, and therefore you're my brother. Tough. You're my sister, and a brother and sister of all those who are gathered with us here that are members of that family. So anything else you may be, right? Anything else the world tries to tell you that is your identity, whether it be successful or funny or athletic or whatever the world says this is who you are, all those things at the very most are branches off of the trunk of your identity in God. You are God's. Right. You are a child of God, and everything else is at best secondary. The resurrection makes it very clear, abundantly clear who you are. No longer do you have to wonder. No longer do you have to ask those people on social media. God told you. It's finished. You are his. Thirdly and finally, the resurrection tells you what you must do. What you must do. Verse 17, Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father." And he goes on to make a theological point about the Holy Spirit coming. But here's what I want to say a little bit off the cuff here, is that her gut reaction was the proper one, right? Her reaction of turning to Jesus, falling at his feet, and just holding on was the picture of what it is really to be a Christian. What you are to do, very simply, is to cling to Christ, is to grab onto Christ and to hold on for everything. That is the task of the Christian, which means a couple of things. It means, firstly, that you must let go of the world and of self, because this is the kind of clinging, unfortunately, that takes two hands, right? You can't hold on to God with one hand, but really hold on to that sin you really enjoy. Really hold on to that selfishness you really enjoy. Really hold on to the world that the world is telling you is going to be good enough for you. It's going to bring you a lot of joy. This is the sort of clinging that takes both hands. So it's an either-or situation. It's not have the world and God. It's have God or have the world. That if you're going to have God, you must indeed let go of those things that the world tells you will be enough. And this is one of the chief tasks of the devil, by the way, is that he knows all of us are presented every day, really, but ultimately with this choice of, will I serve God or will I serve the world? And what the devil tries to do, so much of that energy is just trying to make this look pretty enough where it somewhat compares to Christ. Because he knows in reality there is no comparison at all. That there is no comparison to be had between Christ and the world. That if it was just you seeing clearly, if you could just see clearly the things you were choosing between, it wouldn't be a choice. You would have no trouble. But yet we don't see clearly. We see dimly. We see all the things the world offers us and thinks it might be actually as good as it claims to be. Even though the things we keep picking in the world keep failing us, we think maybe the next one will be the thing that's actually good enough. We are like a child who's holding a toy boat and he refuses to put it down so he can get on a real boat and go for an actual ride. Like C.S. Lewis says so famously, he says, we are half-hearted creatures, humans, fooling around with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us.
That's right. You're right.
Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by a holiday at sea, we are far too easily pleased, right? We're holding on to the world as if that's something when infinite joy in Christ is offered us, when being part of the family of God is offered us. Even on this side of salvation, still wondering if the sinful things over there, if the world is actually better than what we have in Christ.
Every day.
Far too easily pleased by the things that the world offers us. And it seems to the outsider, to the non-Christian, that what happens when you come to Christ and when you bow to Christ is that you're put in chains, right? But if you ask anyone who's a Christian, they'll tell you what actually happens is precisely the opposite, that the chains you once had that you were totally aware of broke free. And for the first time ever, in bowing to Christ, you experience freedom. And the first time ever, by becoming his slave, you experience what it means to be actually free. Ask the Christians about it in here, and they'll tell you, you must let go of the things of the world. And again, that's like telling you to drop a toy so you can experience the real thing. There's a better way. And then, of course, it means you must grab onto Christ. Listen, the life of the Christian is not much more than just clinging to Christ. It's not primarily a mountain that you are to climb. It's not primarily a maze that you are to navigate. It's not primarily a ribbon that you hope to win. It's primarily a rock that you are just clinging to, that you are just holding on to. That is the life of the Christian. Charles Spurgeon gives an illustration about these little creatures. These are called limpets, little snail-like creatures. And their entire life is them clinging onto rocks that are amidst the surf. The waves come in and crash over the rocks, and these limpets grab on with everything they have onto the rock, the one thing that is immovable, the one thing that will hold them safe. Spurgeon says this, our little friend the limpet does not know much, but he clings. He cannot tell us much about what he is clinging to. He is not acquainted with the geological formation of the rock, but he clings. He has found something to cling to, and with his little bit of knowledge, he uses it to cling to the rock of his salvation. It is the limpet's life to cling. He says, thousands of God's people have no more faith than this. They know to cling to Jesus with all their heart and soul, and this is enough. Jesus Christ is to them a Savior strong and mighty, and they cleave to him as a rock, unmovable and immutable. This is the life of the Christian. It is not a maze where God puts the cheese of heaven in the middle and says, I hope you can figure it out. It is, I am the rock that is unmovable. It's that us as individuals, as humans, are being tossed about by the waves of our culture, being tossed about by the waves of suffering and difficulty and all the things that come our ways, and then Christ presents himself as the rock to which we can cling, which is unmovable, unshakable, the foundation that will not change, and so it will hold us safe and will hold us secure. Therefore, the life of the Christian is not much more than the life of the limpet. And the truth is, you will never find almost never find limpets alone. But actually, they're a creature that clings constantly together, and they're stronger when they are together. Just like we are. You don't need to understand everything to be saved. In fact, the more you learn, the more you realize that you do not know. And that's kind of the joy of coming to know God. You simply need to cling, to hold to Jesus and say, thy will be done. Psalm 62:7, last slide, says, on God rests my salvation and my glory. My mighty rock, my refuge is God. There is one place you will be safe. There is one place you will find purpose and meaning and joy. There is one place, and actually only one place, that you will find salvation, and it is in the rock of Christ. Grab onto the rock. As we said last week, there were probably upwards of 1 million, 2 million people on Palm Sunday as Christ rode into Jerusalem. They were waving palm branches and cheering, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And then a few days later, we're crying out to kill him, to crucify him, put the nails in his hands and his feet. We want him no more. And the problem was, one that our culture still is facing today. The problem was, they expected Jesus to be the kind of Jesus that was going to come and fulfill their wills. But he ended up being the kind of Jesus that came for the will of God. And the issue is that so many in our culture today are doing the same thing. They're worshiping a Jesus that doesn't actually exist. They're worshiping a Jesus that they're making after their own image. They're worshiping a Jesus that looks a lot like a 21st century American and not like the God who's existed from eternity. There is only one rock to which we can cling, only one rock that is unmovable, and is the rock that is Christ. You must cling to Christ. You must cling to the true Christ, the real Christ, the one who actually is, and not the one that you would like him to be. And if this is true, then Christ that went to the cross is the one that we are clinging to. Then everything in your life, listen, everything in your life must be oriented around the fact that he is risen. What will you do with Jesus, my friend? And I'm talking to the saved and the non-saved. Again today, what will you do with Jesus, my friend? Neutral you cannot be. There is no neutral option. You can pull the cover over your eyes, close your eyes, and pretend that he didn't rise and just keep living your life as you'd like to. You can live that kind of life if you want to. But if you want to be a person that thinks about things, then you must come to the realization that he has risen from the dead, and things in your life must change accordingly. If we can pray for you, church, if we can pray for you, this is why we're here. If we can help bear your burdens, this is why the church exists. We are limpets clinging together and not much more than that. We are simply the limpet holding onto the rock, trying to yell at the other ones to come and grab on. That this is a place of safety. This is a place of nourishment. This is the place of salvation. We want to help you with that. If we can baptize you into Christ, strengthen you in any way, you can come now while we stand and while we sing.